The dry crack of a gunshot echoed across the plains, splintering the air like a pane of glass shattering, shaking loose everything Isabel Carrington had once thought unshakable in her life. It was not the shot of an enemy, but the tearing sound of fate itself, announcing a truth she had never been prepared to face. Beneath the solitary oak that clung to the hillside, the same oak where Isabel had carved her initials beside Edward Wilson's in the innocence of young love, the sight before her numbed her hands. Edward, the man she was betrothed to, only son of the wealthiest family in Timber Creek, held her younger sister Lillian in his arms. It was not a brotherly embrace, nor the soft touch of comfort, but a kiss deep and undeniable. The bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered along the way slipped from her trembling fingers, falling into the parched earth. Purple, white, and yellow petals scattered, carried away on the restless wind, like the fragments of her heart breaking and mixing into Montana's red dust. Her pulse hammered in her chest, her breath caught sharp. Every instinct urged her to turn, to run, to pretend she had not seen. But her feet carried her forward, her dark eyes locking on the image that would be carved into her memory forever. "How could you?" Isabel's voice cut the hush beneath the branches, trembling but clear, piercing the silence like a blade. Edward sprang back from Lillian's hold, his face gone pale beneath his neatly trimmed beard. "Isabel, let me explain. Don't call my name." Her voice was low, but steady enough to chill. "Not anymore." Lillian's curls glimmered under the fractured light of the leaves. She lowered her head, lips trembling, yet her hand clung to Edward's, stubborn as a chain meant to prove a bond sealed. "Sister," Lillian's voice cracked. We never meant for this. How long?" Isabel cut in, her eyes on Edward, unblinking. "How long have you betrayed me? With my own blood?" Edward cleared his throat, straightening, reaching for the calm air of a man raised in privilege. "Isabel, no need for drama. These things happen. Feelings cannot be stopped." 6 months. Lillian's whisper fell like ash. "Since Christmas." The word struck her chest like a blow. That Christmas, Edward had placed a silver locket in her palm, swearing eternal loyalty. That Christmas, he had sat at the Carrington family's table, laughing with her father, smiling at her mother, while under the table his knee brushed against Lillian's. Isabel pulled the engagement ring from her finger. Her hand trembled, but her gaze did not waver. "The wedding is over. You may keep each other." She hurled the ring into the grass, where it vanished among the stalks. Without a glance back, she turned, her steps hard, even as her insides broke apart. Lillian's cry carried after her, Edward's pleading voice following close, but to Isabel they were nothing, more than wind lost on the prairie. The road back to town stretched endlessly. Dust clung to her shoes, her skirts brushed the weeds, and each step dragged the weight of humiliation and loss. She clenched her jaw, refusing to weep. No, she would not give them that. In her mind, voices clamored, the whispers of Timber Creek folk who had watched, doubtful, when a black woman had become the betrothed of a white banker's son. Their false praise, their sharp looks when she walked beside Edward through the church doors. And now, with this scandal loose, what would they say? She saw in her mind the pitying eyes of shopkeepers' wives, the low whispers in the market, the half-smiles at the harvest dance. Her heart was not the only thing betrayed. Her family's standing, fought for with sweat and dignity, had been dragged through the mud. She thought of her father, Joseph Carrington, who had built the general store with his calloused hands, who had expanded the house to welcome Edward as a son. She thought of her mother, Martha, who had placed her hopes in this marriage as a shield against the town's contempt. How could she face them? Yet the sharpest wound was not in Edward's faithlessness. It was the simple, brutal truth that her own sister, the child she had once defended from harsh words and darker nights, had stolen the one treasure meant for her. A gust rose, lifting the red dust, blinding her eyes. She kept her chin high as she entered Timber Creek's main street, where wooden storefronts lined both sides, where hammers rang on anvils, wagon wheels scraped stone, and children's laughter echoed against the walls. A voice called her name. "Miss Carrington?" Mrs. Peterson from the milliner's porch. Isabel gave a small nod, lips pressed thin, her spine unbending. Not a crack, not a weakness shown. Inside she knew one truth. Her life had collapsed before the town's very eyes, and not a soul would let her forget it. The red dirt road stretching out from the oak felt like a wound torn wide through Isabel's chest. Her steps dragged heavy, dust clinging to the hem of her blue dress, shoes stained dark. She moved forward without measure of distance, knowing only that if she stopped, her legs would betray her and fold beneath her. The sun had begun its descent, painting the wooden roofs of Timber Creek in bronze light. The town moved on with its ordinary rhythm. Hammer strikes rang from the forge. Children shouted and chased each other down Main Street. Horses whinnied near the stage depot. Life continued as if her own world had not just collapsed into ruin. A voice cut through the stillness, deep and steady. "Miss Carrington?" Isabel halted. Before her, a man sat astride a tall chestnut horse. She had seen him once or twice in church, had heard his name whispered. Wyatt Thorne, the new foreman at Rockingham M Ranch, come up from Texas only months ago. He dismounted in one clean motion, boots meeting the dirt with a muted thud. Dust clung to him, hat brim shadowing dark hair that curled faintly, a sun-worn face lined just enough to speak of miles traveled and storms endured. His eyes, gray-green and unflinching, settled on her. "Are you all right?" His tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight enough to steady or break. Isabel drew breath, forcing poise into her frame. "I am fine." The thin smile she offered cracked as soon as it touched her lips. Wyatt narrowed his gaze. "No, you're not. And I wouldn't believe it even if you said it 10 times. The plainness of the words startled her. This man, new to Timber Creek, spoke with more truth than all the town's hollow comforts ever could. "Forgive me," she murmured, fingers smoothing her skirt, trying to gather herself. "I have to be getting home." Wyatt said nothing for a beat. His eyes lingered, catching the tremor in her hand, the kind she thought hidden. Then, without comment, he untied a small parcel from his saddle and stepped closer. The scents came with him, leather worn by use, horse sweat, and the faint trace of shaving soap. "It's a long road," Wyatt said quietly. "Walking it like this isn't wise." He led his horse forward, hand firm on the reins. "Monarch carries 2 with ease. Let me see you home." Her pride urged refusal. Her aching body begged otherwise, and the thought of crossing Main Street alone, of faces turning and whispers following, left her silent. Wyatt tilted his head, waiting, not pressing. At last, she gave a small nod. He moved closer. His rough hand brushed her arm as he steadied her, not clumsy, not bold, deliberate, sure. Still, the heat of his touch raced through her, burning beneath her skin. He lifted her onto the saddle, and in that breath she felt his nearness, his breath warm against her cheek, the mingling of sweat, leather, and the faint, clean note of linen from her dress. A heartbeat's moment, yet her chest thundered. Wyatt mounted behind her, careful with the space, close enough that she could feel the breadth of him without the trespass of contact. His hand reached past her to the reins, steady but cautious, as if aware of every inch between them. "Hold steady," he said, voice roughened not by command, but by restraint. The horse moved forward, steps measured, carrying them down the dirt road. Wind caught stray curls from Isabel's hair, carrying them back to brush against her cheek, caught in the warmth of his breath behind her. They rode in silence, the kind that presses and soothes at once. Isabel fixed her gaze on the horizon, eyes burning but chin held high. Wyatt, though she could not see him, read the slight tremors in her shoulders, the weight she bore. He had seen storms on the prairie before. This storm was quieter, but no less fierce. He broke the silence at last. "Wilson?" Her body stiffened. For a moment she thought to deny it, to deflect. But something in his unseen gaze left her without shield. She gave the faintest nod, her words slipping out in little more than breath. "Yes." Wyatt tightened the reins, not harsh, only enough to acknowledge he'd heard. He asked nothing more. Yet his silence carried no judgment, no pity, only a quiet understanding, like a man who knew when words were useless. It stirred something within her. Edward had never been silent. He had filled space with vows, with flattery, with assurances that meant nothing. Wyatt was different. He promised nothing, offered no empty comfort. He simply stayed, solid, unshaken, a post driven deep in stormy ground. The trail curved into a valley washed in sunset, the light draping the grass in copper and fire. Isabel closed her eyes, breathing in, letting the stillness of the moment and the steady rhythm of Wyatt's breath behind her anchor her for a fleeting span. Near town's edge, she spoke, her voice low, hushed. "Thank you, but I can manage myself. You don't need to concern yourself so much." Wyatt leaned slightly forward, his words falling near her ear, firm but quiet. "It's not concern, it's what's right." Simple words, but they sank heavy, rooting in her heart where grief had only carved hollow ground. For an instant, she let her guard slip, leaning into the strength of that presence. But just as quick, she straightened again, drawing her shell around her. Inwardly, she whispered to herself, "Do not expect, Isabel. He is not yours." The wooden door of the Carrington General Store swung open with its familiar chime. Yet tonight, the sound pierced through Isabel like a blade. She paused at the threshold, drawing a long breath before stepping in, as though she had to summon every ounce of strength left in her body. Inside, lamplight spread its amber glow across shelves lined with sacks of sugar, flour, jars of cornmeal, tins of condensed milk, and rows of brightly wrapped candies that children of Timber Creek often eyed with longing. Behind the counter stood her father, Joseph Carrington, ledger in hand. He was a man of solid build, his dark skin etched with years of labor beneath sun and storm, his broad brow forever shadowed by thought. Folks said he did not smile often, but when he did, it erased all doubt of the honesty carved deep in his heart. "Isabel," he said, looking up, his voice steady but tinged with concern. You're late. She nodded, forcing a smile, but his eyes caught the shift at once. Nothing escaped Joseph Carrington's gaze. All is well? He asked, setting the ledger aside. Isabel opened her mouth, but her throat closed tight. Only when her mother entered from the back room, the rustle of her cotton dress brushing the floor, did she find her voice. Martha Carrington was strong in her own fashion, watchful, careful, always aware of what neighbors whispered, what churchgoers thought. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her back remained straight, her eyes sharp with both determination and the constant fear that the world would never be fair to a family of their color. Mother, father, Isabel's voice wavered. I ended my engagement with Edward Wilson. Martha froze, the wooden spoon in her hand clattering against the floorboards. Isabel, what nonsense is this? The wedding is only weeks away. Joseph raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes held steady on his daughter. Why? Isabel inhaled, the words like hot coals in her chest. Because he betrayed me. With Lillian. The room stilled. The oil lamp flickered, shadows stretching along the wooden walls. Martha pressed a hand to her chest, sinking into a chair, muttering disbelief. Joseph clenched his fists, knuckles cracking, his eyes darkening like a sky before storm. You are certain? He asked, voice dropping low. I saw them with my own eyes. Tears broke free, sliding down her cheeks. Beneath the oak, where he once made me promises. Joseph let out a low growl, striking the counter with his palm so hard the candy jars rattled. Martha wept into her handkerchief, shoulders shaking. Lord above, she gasped. What will they say now? They already look down on us, and this... Reputation is not what we need fear. Joseph cut her off, his voice iron. My daughter has been shamed, by a coward of a man, and by her own sister who has forgotten her place. Before another word could be spoken, hoofbeats sounded outside, followed by a sharp knock. Isabel turned, blood running cold as Edward Wilson strode in, cloak tailored, posture proud, his face set in calm confidence. Beside him, Lillian trailed, head bowed, though her hand clung tight to his arm. Mr. Carrington, Edward began, his tone condescending. I've come to speak plainly. Lillian and I, our feelings are genuine. I hereby break the engagement with Isabel and... He got no further. Joseph stepped from behind the counter, his frame solid as a wall. Mr. Wilson, he growled, do you believe I'll allow you to dishonor one daughter, then stroll in here demanding to wed another? Edward lifted his chin, voice smooth, almost bored. Sir, I understand tempers run high, but think with reason. An alliance between our families is still advantageous. If not Isabel, then Lillian. Enough! Joseph's shout thundered through the small room. He stepped closer, fire in his eyes. My daughters are not wares for you to bargain. Get out of my house before I throw you out with my own hands. Lillian gasped, clutching Edward tighter. Father, please listen. Joseph turned, voice heavy with grief but hard as stone. Lillian, you betrayed your sister. You betrayed this family. If you choose him, then walk out that door with him. But do not ask me to bless it. The tension choked the air. Edward's face flushed with anger, but he did not argue. He only pulled Lillian toward the door, casting one last glance at Isabel, a look of contempt, as if to say she had lost everything. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving silence thick as smoke. Isabel stood rooted, her hands clasped so tightly the blood drained from her fingers. She braced herself for reproach, for her mother's sharp words about letting the future slip away, for her father's disappointment at the loss of their only chance at standing equal in Timber Creek. But Joseph turned back, his steps slow, deliberate. He laid a calloused hand upon her shoulder, his gaze steady, proud. "You have done no wrong, Isabel," he said, each word carved deep. "The wrong is his, and the girl who forgot her duty to this family. But you kept your dignity. I am proud of you." Martha still wept, yet when she lifted her face, even her eyes held the truth. Isabel had lost much, but she had not bowed her head. Isabel bit her lip, feeling the pain in her chest ease by the smallest measure. Whatever the town might say, in this house her father stood with her. And that meant more than any promise Edward Wilson had ever made. That night, as Timber Creek settled into quiet, Isabel sat at her window, the moon casting pale light across her face. Below, she heard her father's voice in the kitchen, steady and unshaken, as he spoke to her mother. "We are Carringtons. They may scorn us, but they will never break us." Isabel closed her eyes. For the first time that day, she let the tears fall freely. Yet beneath the sorrow lay a fragile light, the pride of belonging, the bond of family, and the certainty that she still had a place to stand, even if the world outside had turned against her. Night fell over Timber Creek like a heavy quilt. The moon drifted behind clouds, leaving only thin silver strands spilling through the leaves to cast shadows over the Carrington home. Inside, Martha Carrington's muffled sobs filled the kitchen, echoing against walls that had weathered too many winters. On the dining table lay a hastily folded note, ink still smudged from a hand too eager to flee. The round, hurried letters belonged unmistakably to Lillian. "Dearest Mother and Father, I know you will be angry, but my heart leaves me no other path. Edward and I have chosen to leave Timber Creek for a new beginning. I do not expect forgiveness, only hope that one day you'll understand love does not always follow the road expected. Please do not look for me. Your daughter, Lillian." Martha clutched the letter, her sobs breaking apart with each breath. She's only 19, too young to know what love even means. Joseph stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back, his weathered face flushed with fury. "That is not love," he said through clenched teeth. "It's weakness, selfishness. She chose to abandon her family for a traitor." Isabel sat still, her hands gripping her knees until her knuckles blanched. Inside her, storms collided, the old wound of betrayal torn open again, yet mingled with a quiet relief. Lillian's choice meant she would not have to see them together each day, would not endure their presence under the same roof. The relief brought guilt, but it was real. "She will regret this," Joseph muttered, voice rough. "And if she returns, I do not know if I'll have arms left to welcome her." Isabel said nothing. She quietly folded Lillian's letter and placed it in the drawer, as though storing away the last trace of a sister she once trusted. By dawn, the town already knew. Someone had seen Edward and Lillian board the night coach, hand in hand, without hesitation. The gossip spread like wildfire through saloons, shops, and most of all, outside the church steps come Sunday morning. Isabel felt it the moment she stepped from the carriage at the chapel gate. Heads turned, whispers rose behind fans and wide-brimmed hats. There was no attempt to mask curiosity, even delight, at the scandal staining the Carrington name. Martha walked close to her husband, face hidden beneath her shawl, red eyes betraying her grief. Joseph's stride was heavy, shoulders squared as if daring the town to meet his gaze and judge him. Isabel, in her plain dark blue dress, followed behind. Her heart thudded, each step forward cutting deeper into the raw wound she carried. Then a hand appeared in front of her. She looked up. Wyatt Thorne stood at the entrance, hat in hand, his steady eyes fixed on her. He spoke no word, only inclined his head and offered his arm. For a moment she hesitated. She knew the instant she accepted, every gaze would follow, every whisper shift. But perhaps that was reason enough not to refuse. She laid, her hand upon his arm. Warmth seeped through the fabric, straight into her trembling chest. Wyatt did not smile broadly, nor make a show of it. Only a faint nod, a flicker in his gray-green eyes, said what he needed to say. "You are not alone. I am here." Together, they entered the church. The whispers flared behind them, but Isabel no longer heard. Her ears filled only with her heartbeat and the firm rhythm of his steps beside her. Throughout the service, she sat near him. When the pastor spoke of forgiveness and the trials of faith, her body shivered. A rough hand rested lightly on the pew beside hers, not quite touching, yet close enough for her to feel his presence like an anchor. When the congregation rose to sing, she glanced sideways. Wyatt faced forward, voice low as he joined the hymn, lips pressed firm. Then, just a flick of his head, his eyes met hers. In that moment, she caught the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not pity, but reassurance. Isabel drew a deep breath. A thin layer of ice around her heart cracked and melted. After the service, the Carringtons walked out under the stares of the crowd. Martha lowered her face. Joseph's hand clenched around hers like a shield. Isabel braced herself to leave quietly, but Wyatt stepped forward, lifting his hat back onto his head. "You've done the hardest thing today," he said softly, "just for her." She stiffened, then whispered back, "You don't know what I carry." His gaze did not falter. "I know enough to see courage in a woman who walks upright before the whole town." Her breath caught. The words carried no sweetness, no promises, only truth spoken plain, and that was what she needed most. On the ride home, wheels ground over gravel, her parents silent beside her. Isabel looked out toward the mountains fading into cloud. Pain still lived sharp in her chest, but alongside it stirred something new, fragile yet alive. A hand offered, an unshaken presence, a faint smile. For the first time since her world had fallen under the oak, Isabel felt the smallest measure of protection. In the days after Lillian's departure, the Carrington home lay under a gray pall, as though sorrow itself had settled in the rafters. Martha wept quietly when she thought no one was listening. Joseph spoke less than usual, and Isabel forced a brittle smile each time the shop bell chimed and a customer walked in. Word of the elopement had spread through Timber Creek like dust carried on wind, and whispers still followed her down the street. Yet instead of bowing her head, she chose to face them. Each morning she opened the counter, greeted customers, and worked as if her heart bore no cracks at all. What she had not expected was Wyatt Thorne stepping into the store more often. At first he came for simple supplies, a sack of sugar, a bag of coffee beans, a box of nails, a coil of rope. Sometimes he bought nothing more than a packet of tobacco, but always he lingered, speaking with her for a few minutes, as though that was his true reason for coming. One late afternoon, clouds bruised the sky when Wyatt arrived carrying a broken wagon wheel. Sweat clung to his brow, his shirt damp at the collar. "Miss Carrington," he said, voice low, "my rig broke down out front. I hear you're handy with a needle. Think you might mend wood as well as cloth?" For the first time in weeks, Isabel laughed. The sound was light, unexpected, and it softened the heavy air in the shop. "I cannot patch wagon wheels, but my father can. If you'll wait, I'll fetch nails and a hammer for him." Wyatt smiled faintly, and as they lifted the box together, his hand brushed hers. The touch was brief, but it jolted her, leaving her fingers trembling. He noticed but did not pull away too quickly, letting the moment hang just long enough before releasing. In that silence lingered something warmer than words. From then on, such accidental touches became a quiet ritual. When he passed her coins, his fingertips grazed hers. When she handed him a sack of flour, her hand held his a shade longer than needful. Neither spoke of it, but both felt the invisible thread tightening. One evening after closing, Isabel sat by the lamplight tallying accounts when the door creaked open. Wyatt stepped in, hat in hand, expression apologetic. "Forgive me for coming late, but I need lamp oil and some burlap. The road back to the ranch is dark, and I won't make it to town in daylight soon." She rose and fetched the goods. Their hands touched again in the exchange, and this time their eyes caught and held. The lamplight fell across his face, lined by weather yet honest, and the directness of his gray-green gaze made her heart stumble. She looked away quickly, hiding the small smile tugging at her lips. "You've been here so often," she teased, setting her ledger aside. "I'm beginning to think Rockingham M has no one else to run errands." Wyatt tilted his head, the corner of his mouth quirking. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I have a reason for choosing this store over others." Heat rose to her cheeks. Before she could answer, her father's footsteps creaked on the stairs. Wyatt dipped his head politely. "Thank you, Miss Carrington. I'll return if I need more." And then he was gone. Their bond grew not through bold declarations, but through fragments of talk and simple deeds. When deliveries were made to the ranch, he sometimes invited her to ride part of the way. They sat on the wagon seat, and he told her of Missouri, of floods that swept away cattle, of a boyhood dream to one day own land of his own. "Not much," Wyatt said, eyes fixed on the far range. "Just enough to call mine. A roof, a few dozen head, and someone to share it with." Isabel listened, her heart tugged by the plainness of it. She spoke of her own dream, softer, but no less true. "I'd like to teach. A schoolhouse, even a small one, especially for children of color. They have fewer chances, but they deserve to read and write." Wyatt looked at her then, as though fixing her words deep in memory. "Your dream is bigger than land and cattle," he murmured. "It touches the soul of people." On a Sunday afternoon, after service, when townsfolk lingered outside the chapel gossiping, Wyatt walked straight to her. He ignored the stares, holding his hat in both hands, face solemn. "Miss Carrington," he said, his voice firm enough for all to hear, "I am not skilled in fine words, but I wish you to know I do not come to your store only for goods. I would like permission to court you, properly, honorably." The whispers flared instantly. Some gawked, others smirked. Isabel froze, her face burning. Flight tempted her, but Wyatt's eyes anchored her in place. They carried no pressure, only clear, quiet intent. Her voice cracked as she tried to answer. "You know what I've endured." "I'm not sure I can," he interrupted gently but firmly. "I know. I don't ask for your answer today. I only want you to understand. Someone sees you, not as the banker's discarded bride, not as a shopkeeper's daughter, just as yourself, Isabel Carrington." Her chest ached at the weight of his words. How long had it been since someone spoke her name with such plain respect, untainted by pity or calculation? She drew a breath, then nodded, her voice trembling but steady. "Then, I'll allow you to try." Wyatt's smile was small, but it lit his face like sunlight through storm clouds. He tipped his hat, bowed slightly, and walked away, leaving her standing in the churchyard. Her pulse thundered, but for the first time in many months, she felt something take root inside her, a tender green shoot rising from ground once barren. Rain began at noon, just as Isabel was returning from a delivery at the edge of town. The sky darkened without warning, wind stirring dust into twisting funnels before heavy drops slapped the hard earth, turning road to muck. Her horse balked, hooves slipping. Then a sharp crack split the air. The wagon axle broke, pitching the cart sideways into a mire. Isabel struggled to steady herself, but the wheel sank deep into mud, stuck fast. Rain lashed her face. Her cloak plastered cold against her skin. She bit her lip, scanning the endless gray fields, despair pressing in. Through the curtain of storm, a figure appeared astride a chestnut horse. Wyatt Thorne. He hauled on the reins, swung down in one motion, and came running. "Isabel!" His shout carried over the rain. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears lost in the water on her cheeks. "The wagon's broken. He didn't wait. His rough hand closed around her arm, strong and steady despite the cold. "There's a line shack not half a mile from here. We need shelter before dark." He lifted her onto his horse, his arms circling her waist, holding her firm. His breath was hot at her ear, his heartbeat steady against her back, an anchor in the chaos. The line shack stood where the hills dipped low, a canvas-sided shelter meant for cowhands in long drives. Wyatt shoved the door open, guided her inside, then tied the horse under the lean-to. The place was small, but dry. It smelled of damp timber, hay, and old smoke. Isabel shivered, her dress clinging heavy to her skin, curls dripping down her cheeks. Wyatt knelt by the supply chest, pulled out a wool blanket, and wrapped it around her shoulders. His touch was careful, slow, as though he feared she might break. "Thank you," she whispered, voice ragged. Wyatt sat across from her, the lamplight he'd struck glowing against his weathered face. Their shadows stretched across the canvas walls, tall and close, and the silence thickened. For a long moment, only rain filled the air, steady and relentless. Isabel clutched the blanket, but her racing pulse was no longer from cold. When she raised her head, his gaze met hers, honest, patient, unflinching. He didn't rush words. He simply lifted a hand, pausing just before her cheek, waiting for permission. Slowly, she nodded. His calloused palm brushed her skin, burning warm in the chill. Isabel drew a breath, her defenses, built since Edward's betrayal, crumbling like wet paper. For the first time, she wasn't the abandoned fiancée, nor the woman shamed by gossip. In Wyatt's eyes, she was simply herself. "Why do you look at me like that?" she whispered, trying to steady her trembling. Because you deserve to be seen, he answered softly. The last wall inside her gave way. She let him bend closer, their lips meeting in a tentative kiss that deepened, urgent, carrying months of feeling unspoken. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, bearing damp skin beneath. Wyatt drew her against him, arms firm, holding as if he'd fight the storm itself to keep her safe. Isabel clung to him in return, fingers pressing into his broad shoulders, feeling the strength that steadied her. The lamplight flickered, casting their joined silhouettes on the canvas. Rain hammered the roof, a rhythm to their breath, to their touch. What began as hesitance turned to certainty, a silent vow written in the closeness of their bodies. In his embrace, Isabel allowed herself to believe again, to open. Not haunted by Edward, not shadowed by Lillian, only herself and Wyatt, bound in the raw truth of this moment. Later, when the storm softened, she lay against his chest, her breath still uneven. He pulled the blanket over her once more, his hand steady at her back. "What happened tonight?" she murmured. "I don't know what to call it." Wyatt pressed a kiss into her hair. "Not mistake, not comfort. Because I love you, Isabel." Her heart clenched, but not in pain, in wonder. No arrangement, no bargain, no false oath. Just love. Rare, fierce like a flower forcing its bloom in barren soil. Outside, rain kept falling, washing the world clean. Inside the little shack, a fire had sparked, not of wood or lamp, but of two hearts, lit bright enough to weather every storm yet to come. Morning broke over Timber Creek, clear and bright after a long night of rain. Puddles shimmered in the ruts of the red dirt road, reflecting a sky washed clean. In that still fresh light, Wyatt Thorne pushed open the door of the Carrington store, the weight of a sleepless night riding in his eyes. In the pocket of his worn coat lay a small object he had turned over and over in his hand until dawn. Behind the counter, Isabel stacked bolts of fabric newly arrived from Helena, her curls loose around her face, her lips pressed thin from the whispers that had trailed her at church the day before. Folks still murmured behind fans and hat brims. The black woman cast aside, now seen beside a white man. She heard it all, but kept her chin high. Wyatt set his hat on the counter. His gray-green gaze found hers, steady as stone. "Isabel Carrington," he began, voice deep. "I am no wealthy man. I have no fine name to offer. What I do have are two hands that know how to work, a heart that already belongs to you, and this." From his pocket he drew a gold ring, edges worn smooth with years, the metal bright only where a hand had polished it in daily life. "This was my mother's wedding ring," Wyatt said, his voice thick. "My father gave it to her the day they had nothing but hope and trust between them. I want to place it on your hand, if you'll consent to be my wife." The store fell silent. Joseph Carrington looked up from the ledger at the back counter, his stern face unreadable save for a flicker of light in his eyes. Martha Carrington came down the stairs, her brow still etched with worry. She could not hide her hesitation. What kind of future could her daughter truly have with a white ranch foreman who owned nothing but his labor? Isabel froze, her hand pressed to the counter. Her heart hammered, not from fear, but from a certainty blooming deep inside. Wyatt's eyes held no promise of riches, no empty vows, but they carried the weight of never leaving her side. She stepped out from behind the counter, her hand trembling as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as though it had waited for her all along. Joseph nodded, his voice a low decree. "If you choose him, Isabel, then I will stand behind you. This man's back is bent from sun, his hands calloused from work. I believe he'll know how to hold a family." Martha lowered herself into a chair, tears wetting her kerchief. "All I ever wanted was safety for my daughter. Wyatt, swear before God you'll never let her carry shame again." Wyatt laid his hand over his chest, his voice solemn. "I swear, whatever storms come, Isabel will never face them alone." The wedding was held at month's end, autumn brushing the grass gold. There were no golden banners, no hired musicians, as had once been planned for Edward Wilson. Only the little wooden church at the end of Main Street, a jar of wildflowers on the altar, and the pews filled with those who mattered most. Isabel wore a cotton gown her mother stitched by hand, plain white trimmed with narrow lace. Her curls were pinned back, a few soft strands left to frame her face. Her father took her arm and walked her down the aisle, head unbowed beneath the eyes of a watching town. Wyatt stood waiting, his old suit brushed clean, his white shirt bright under the sunlight streaming through stained glass. He looked only at her, not at the crowd, not at the whispers curling along the pews. When the minister spoke the blessing, murmurs rippled. Carrington's daughter, marrying Wyatt Thorne. Does he know what he's doing? How long can they last? Isabel heard it all, but Wyatt's hand closed firmly around hers, his pulse steady in her palm. He leaned closer, whispered just for her, "Let them talk." A smile lifted her lips, 4 small words, and every voice outside their circle faded. After the service, there was only a modest supper at the Carrington home. Martha baked a cake. Joseph uncorked an old bottle of wine. A neighbor brought a basket of apples. Children ran laughing in the yard. It was simple. It was true. And it was theirs. That evening, Isabel stood on the porch, watching lanterns glow across the town. She touched the ring on her finger and felt peace. This was no dream built of wealth or pretense. This was life, steady and real, beside a man who had stood before the world and said, "Let them talk." She leaned into Wyatt's shoulder and whispered, "We've begun a different road." He bent and kissed her hair. "Our road, Izzy, no one else's." And in that first quiet night of their marriage, Isabel Carrington knew she had found what no grand wedding could ever bring. A love chosen day by day, carved out of truth, and strong enough to endure. After their plain wedding, Isabel and Wyatt did not take a journey as other couples dreamed. Instead, they loaded their few belongings onto the old wagon and drove to the small cabin by the creek, the one Wyatt had been mending in spare hours for months. It was nothing more than a single-room dwelling with a loft above and rough furniture built by his own hands. To outsiders, it might have looked meager, but when Isabel stepped across the threshold and breathed in the sharp scent of pine resin, she knew this was a true home. Winter came early to Timber Creek. At first, the wind only whispered, but soon snow began to fall, blanketing the prairie in white. The little cabin became their world. Outside, branches cracked under the weight of ice. Inside, firelight painted Isabel's cheeks warm each evening. Life was not easy. Many mornings Wyatt rose before dawn to chop wood, shoulders bent under the burden of heavy logs he stacked high by the door. Isabel patched worn shirts, cooked meals from the scant supplies that remained after their trips to town. Yet hardship only bound them tighter. Every morning she woke to find a cup of coffee steaming beside her bed. Wyatt never spoke of it, only left it there before tending the fire. But that small act spoke more than 1,000 promises. When Wyatt returned from tending cattle, he would discover a scrap of paper tucked in his coat pocket, written in her hurried hand. Mind the cold wind, or soup tonight, your favorite. They invented games to fill the long nights. Wyatt taught her poker with beans for stakes. They wagered chores. Who would wash dishes? Who would rise early to stoke the fire? Once Isabel lost 4 games in a row, but Wyatt only laughed, rolled his sleeves, and scrubbed the pans without complaint. When they did not play, she read from her father's old books, her voice soft against the roar of winter outside. Wyatt sat whittling, shaving wood into the shape of horses, lifting his eyes often, just to watch her bent over the page by lamplight. One night, snow piled high enough to wedge the front door shut. Wyatt came in soaked from patching a leak in the roof, his body trembling. Isabel seized a towel, wrapped him with shaking hands, scolding under her breath. You never guard yourself. Yet her fingers brushed the melting flakes from his hair with tenderness. Wyatt laughed, pulling her into his cold arms. Then I'll let you guard me. The words embarrassed her, but they burned warm in her chest. The season etched itself into memory through such moments. One afternoon, tidying drawers, Isabel found a block of wood Wyatt had carved, her initials, IC, beside a tiny blossom. When she showed it to him, his face reddened, but she only smiled and tucked it into her keepsake box. They quarreled at times, too. One evening, she wanted to light a second lamp to read, while Wyatt worried about the oil running low. Voices rose, but respect never left the room. In the end, Wyatt lit the extra lamp and sat beside her, listening to her voice until the chapter ended. She laid her hand on his and whispered, "Thank you for yielding." He answered with a kiss to her knuckles, nothing more. Laughter was never scarce. Once Isabel burned the crust of a pie, filling the cabin with smoke. Wyatt coughed and laughed until his shoulders shook, then ate the charred slice with a grimace, declaring, "Delicious if we call it a winter delicacy." She laughed until tears blurred her eyes, snatching the other blackened piece away before he could. Some nights passed in silence, the two of them watching flames curl in the hearth. Isabel rested her head on his shoulder, eyes fixed on firelight. Wyatt spoke of his dream, someday a ranch of his own. She answered not with words, but a squeeze of his hand, a vow in gesture. She confessed her wish, too, to open a school for colored children, to give them the gift of letters. Wyatt listened without mockery, nodding firm. We'll make it happen. Come spring, I'll raise you a schoolhouse by this creek. Winter pressed hard, but it could not extinguish their warmth. The cabin stood buried in frost, yet inside, coffee steamed at dawn, notes hid in pockets, and laughter echoed off the timbered walls. Here, in a place she once believed held only cold and loneliness, Isabel Carrington discovered her true home. A winter home, not gilded, not grand, but strong as the mountains that shadowed Timber Creek. A home where love did not shout, but endured, steady as stone. March morning came soft over Timber Creek, thin mist clinging to the prairie grass. Isabel sat on the porch mending an old quilted coat, needle pricking steady in her fingers. Wyatt split wood nearby, each strike of his axe like the heartbeat of their little cabin. The quiet felt earned after the long, hard winter, until the pounding of hooves broke it. Matthew, her 16-year-old brother, rained hard at the fence line, his face streaked with dust. He swung down, breathless. A letter from Helena. It's from Lillian. Isabel's hands faltered. The envelope, damp with morning dew, carried the sharp scent of red wax and the familiar loops of her sister's handwriting. She stepped inside, tore it open in the pale light spilling through the window. The words were few, but every line cut deep. Lillian was with child. Edward had left her for a wealthy woman. Sick, frail, abandoned, she pleaded for forgiveness and begged to come home. Isabel sat frozen, the letter trembling in her grip. Fury rose first, hot and biting. The image of that oak tree years ago, her sister's lips on Edward's, stealing not just her betrothed, but the family's honor. Yet beneath the anger, grief spread, sharp and unrelenting. She saw not the betrayer, but a girl alone, heavy with life and facing it with no one at her side. When her mother heard, Martha wept openly. Wrong as she was, she's still my child. Joseph said little, jaw clenched, fists balled tight, eyes storm dark with conflict. His silence spoke of the same battle waging inside Isabel. She stepped out to the porch, March wind biting her cheeks. Tears spilled unchecked, mixing with the chill. She crushed the letter in her palm, whispers tearing inside her. She deserves this. She chose her path. Then another voice, gentler. The baby is innocent. Blood is blood. A hand settled firm on her shoulder. Wyatt. He didn't ask. One glance at her face and the letter told him enough. When she choked out, I don't know what to do. I'm angry, but I ache for her. If I turn away, I'll regret it all my life. If I forgive, I don't know if I'm ready. He simply took her hand in his. We'll ride to Helena, he said, voice low and resolute. Not to excuse what's been done, but to do what's right. For Lillian. And for the child. Isabel turned to him, finding no judgment in his eyes, only calm strength and unwavering love. Fear ebbed, replaced by the courage he lent her. If you're with me, she whispered, I'll have enough. The next morning, Wyatt readied the horses. He packed bread, blankets, a few medicines. Isabel folded one of her mother's knitted scarves to bring along, meant for Lillian. At the door, Joseph embraced his daughter fiercely. He spoke only once. If you go, go with a straight heart. I trust you. They set out on Monarch, the chestnut stallion carrying them across wide plains washed in pale sunlight. Wyatt held the reins with one hand, the other wrapped firm around Isabel's waist. She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his chest, anchor against the unknown ahead. The road stretched endless, sky streaked blue and gold. Each time dread crept in, Isabel closed her eyes, listening to Wyatt's breath close behind. He bent once to murmur near her ear, You're not alone. Whatever waits, we'll face it together. She gripped the hand at her waist. For the first time, she saw her life as more than survival, more than scandal endured. She saw herself as half of a pair, riding into whatever storm might come. By late afternoon, the sky burned red, clouds aflame. Grass bent under Monarch's hooves as they pressed on, silhouettes dark against the fire of the horizon. Isabel leaned into Wyatt, their figures etched together like one. They did not know what Helena would hold, anger, forgiveness, or death. But they knew this. They would stand before it, side by side. And in that moment, galloping beneath the vast western sky, Isabel Carrington learned that love was not only in tender words or quiet kisses, it was in the choice to keep riding together, no matter how rough the road, no matter how uncertain the end. Helena greeted them under a leaden sky. Red brick houses pressed tight against narrow streets, wagon wheels and hoofbeats echoing off stone. Wyatt reigned monarch before a modest house, the one the postman had described. A faint light flickered behind its window. Isabel stepped inside, heart heavy. The downstairs room smelled of damp wood and boiled medicine. By the window stood a narrow bed, and on it lay Lillian. Her dark hair tangled loose, her face so hollow Isabel almost failed to know her. The sound of the door made her stir. She turned, eyes once proud, now dulled, glassy with tears. "Isabel." Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. Isabel froze. Memories struck. Oak tree betrayals, cruel words, the glint of a discarded ring. Her chest clenched. But in Lillian's eyes, she saw nothing left of arrogance, only fear and regret. Lillian reached out, hand trembling in the air, like a child begging not to be left alone. Isabel moved forward, knelt at the bedside, and took it. The touch was cold, frail, but still of her own blood. Tears streaked Lillian's cheeks. She stammered through sobs, confessing wrong, wishing to turn back, pleading for forgiveness. The words broke against Isabel's old wounds, yet she bent low and pulled her sister close. Their tears mingled. For the first time since betrayal, Isabel felt the wall of bitterness crack. Wyatt stood quietly in the corner, eyes softened. He knew no counsel was needed. This was not his to fix, but two sisters finding their way back. By morning, plans were made. Wyatt hired a wagon and lined it with blankets. Lillian, weak and swollen with child, leaned against Isabel as they set out. At times, she whispered doubts. "You shouldn't bring me back. They'll never forgive me." Isabel only tightened her grip. "There'll be anger, yes. Pain, too. But a home is still a home. We'll start over." On the driver's bench, Wyatt kept steady hold of the reins, glancing back at them. He saw Isabel's jaw set firm, her resolve unshaken, and it assured him they were doing right. When the wagon rolled into Timber Creek, townsfolk paused mid-step. Whispers cut the air sharper than the March wind. They pointed, murmured. The prodigal sister, belly swollen, shamed and returned. And Isabel, the one she betrayed, walking beside her. Wyatt climbed down first, opened the door. Isabel would not let her sister descend alone. She wrapped an arm around Lillian and guided her onto the street. Murmurs rose. "That's her, back again." How can Isabel bear it? Too merciful, some would say. But Isabel's chin lifted high. Step by step she bore her sister's weight and the town's judgment both. Her hand firm on Lillian's shoulder was shield enough. At the Carrington doorway, Martha ran down the steps, tears streaming as she gathered both daughters in her arms. "My girls," she sobbed, clinging tight. Behind her stood Joseph. His face was iron, eyes fixed on Lillian. For a heartbeat, he seemed ready to turn away. But his gaze shifted to Isabel, her arms wrapped protectively around her sister, and something in him relented. "If Isabel brings you back, then I will not shut the door," he said at last, voice gravel rough. "But know this, Lillian, your life begins again here, and you'll earn every piece of it." Lillian collapsed against him, weeping. I will, Father. Only let me stay. That night, the Carrington home glowed with lamplight. Around the table they sat together once more, fractured, not whole, yet mending. Martha's eyes remained wet. Joseph's sternness did not ease, but the family was no longer broken apart. Wyatt sat close to Isabel, his hand steady on her knee beneath the table. She looked at them all, her parents, her weakened sister, the man who'd chosen her without condition. She knew the road forward would not be easy. The town's gossip would not vanish. The past could not be erased. But they had chosen not to let bitterness win. They had chosen to forgive. That night, Isabel leaned toward her sister and whispered, "Tomorrow starts a new chapter. You're not alone anymore. We'll begin again, together." Tears spilled from Lillian's eyes once more, yet now they glimmered with something different: hope. And in that old wooden house within a town quick to judge, the Carringtons reclaimed their bond. Not because the past was spotless, but because they dared to open the door to forgiveness. The following spring, Timber Creek was steeped in the scent of fresh earth and the sound of water rushing through the thawed creeks. Inside the Carrington home, the silence that had weighed heavy for months was broken by the first cries of a newborn. A tiny boy, skin warm brown, eyes barely open, fists waving as though searching for a place to rest. He was Lillian's son. But joy quickly dimmed beneath a shadow. After months of weakness in Helena, Lillian's body no longer had the strength to endure a hard birth. Her hand clutched Isabel's, her sweat-soaked face turned pale, her voice faint as a whisper in the wind. She begged her sister to raise the child, not to let him repeat the mistakes she herself had made. Isabel, choking back tears, pressed her forehead to her sister's hand and promised. Hours later, Lillian's breath faded away. She left Timber Creek forever, leaving behind her newborn son and the grief of those who loved her. Martha collapsed at the bedside in sobs, while Joseph turned his face to the window, his rough hand trembling against the wooden frame as he fought but to keep his sorrow contained. Isabel gathered the infant in her arms, her eyes brimming. Wyatt stepped forward, laying a steady hand on his wife's shoulder. He looked at the child, then at her, and his voice was firm yet gentle. "Family isn't just blood, it's love. If Lillian cannot be here, then we will be. Jonas will be our son." Hearing him speak the name, Jonas, Isabel knew her husband had already taken the child as his own flesh and blood. The early days were grueling. Jonas cried through the nights, and Isabel often carried him out to the porch, hoping the night wind would soothe him. Wyatt sat nearby, coaxing soft notes from his battered harmonica to drown out the cries and give her a measure of peace. In town, whispers returned. Some said the boy wasn't truly Isabel's, that he would carry a mark forever. But she paid them no mind. In Jonas's dark eyes, she saw not shame, but her sister's memory, and the chance to heal what had once been broken. Wyatt laughed off the gossip openly. Blood or not, it makes no difference. Love is what matters. His certainty silenced many, and soon the community began to help. Mrs. Peterson brought goat's milk, the pastor offered baby clothes, and neighbors lent a hand where they could. Time passed. Winter into summer, summer into winter again. Jonas grew strong, taking his first steps across the packed earth in front of the cabin. He called Isabel Mama and Wyatt Pa without hesitation. Those small voices echoed across the hills, filling the once quiet cabin with life. By the second year, Isabel carried her first child with Wyatt. News spread quickly, and some wondered aloud if Jonas would now be set aside. But those doubts did not last. For when their baby was born, Wyatt lifted Jonas in his arms, held him over the cradle, and said with steady conviction, "You are no different than his brother. This house has two sons, not one." Isabel watched them with tears shining in her eyes. In that moment, she felt her heart swell with gratitude. Jonas had never been treated as anything less. He grew as though born of their blood, raised in the same love as any child of theirs. And in time, Timber Creek no longer spoke of scandal, but of Isabel's quiet courage and Wyatt's unshakable kindness. Years had passed since Isabel Carrington and Wyatt Thorne weathered their first harsh winter together in the small cabin by the creek. Timber Creek itself had changed. The once sleepy town now bustled with wagons clattering over gravel-paved streets. New homes rose along the main road, shops displayed goods from faraway cities, and the air was filled with the hum of a growing community. Yet one thing remained constant: the Thorne Carrington homestead, a place spoken of with both respect and affection. The ranch was never the grandest in Montana. It could not boast the vast herds or sprawling acreage of the wealthiest cattle barons. But what it had was something rarer: stability and warmth. The cabin where their life together began had grown into a sturdy two-story home with a broad porch facing the open fields. Maples shaded the front yard where chickens scattered as children chased after them. The western paddock held sleek, well-bred horses, and beyond that stretched pastures green all the way to the horizon. Jonas, once carried into that home amid tears and loss, now stood tall and broad-shouldered, the very image of strength. He managed the horse stock with a care and discipline that mirrored Wyatt in his younger years. At his side were his siblings, Matthew with his steady hands, Ruth with her quick wit, and Daniel with his restless energy. Each bore a different spirit, yet together they formed a bond as strong as any bloodline. No one in Timber Creek called Jonas Lillian's boy anymore. He was, and always had been, a Thorne. Dear friends, if this tale has stirred memories of your own, of a love once found, a home once built, or a moment that still warms you, please share it with us in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us, so that these Wild West love stories may continue to bring light and warmth to all our hearts.